AT&T Research after uni. I joined AT&T after uni, and then started doing telco type stuff. That was in the 90s. Then we span out a startup from AT&T Research. So did run that for a few years with some folks I knew. And then we span out another startup from that startup, which existed for about 20 years before it was acquired. And that's the point at which I joined AWS. So I mentioned that at AWS, I am a solutions architect. And something that people often ask is, what do solutions architects at AWS do? It's a good question. The fundamental thing that we do is to work with customers, right? That's the kind of the key thing. We're customer-facing resource. And in a nutshell, what we try to do is help customers to get the most business value out of using the AWS cloud. And so that means we really need to understand what the customer's business problems are, not just technical problems, but business problems. And then if we understand the business problem, we can advise the customer, well, you know, these are different solutions you might these are different solutions you might choose. These are the different trade-offs, and this is the one that I would recommend. What does that involve in practice? I've tried to show on this slide a few different things that we might do. So there could be some whiteboarding. We often run enablement events, so you've probably participated in some of these immersion days or game days or other things like that. There's a picture of a game day up there that I ran. We evangelize to the wider industry, so that can involve like presenting at conferences or other events like that. So there's a picture of me up on stage. I can't remember what the event was there, but evangelizing away in that photo. We also create technical artifacts, so things like blog posts or code samples on GitHub, the labs, the blueprints that might be behind the immersion days that people run. It's pretty important that we hire and develop the next generation of SAs, so that's a core part of the job for solution architect managers, but also for solution architect individual contributors. So hiring is a very distributed responsibility at AWS. And finally, we have to, as we would say at AWS, we have to sharpen the saw. So what do I mean by sharpen the saw? That's really about honing your own capabilities. So learning new skills, developing those skills, getting to the point where they're strong enough that you can actually use them to your customer's advantage. And this is where certifications really come in from an AWS internal perspective. If you sharpen the saw in a particular domain, then one way to prove that you've done that is by taking AWS certifications. So that's one reason why you might consider doing certifications from an internal perspective. I thought I'd just mention a few, mention briefly Amazon's leadership principles. You may well have seen these before. So the picture here looks like a kind of strand of DNA, and that's supposed to give you the idea that Amazon's leadership principles are really at the core of the company, and they describe how Amazon does business, how leaders lead at Amazon, and how we keep the customer at the center of all our decisions. So why are they called the leadership principles? Well, Amazon has a philosophy that everybody at the company is a leader, whether they're leading themselves because they're an individual contributor, or whether they're leading a small team of solutions architects, like in my case, or whether they're leading an entire business unit, like the telco IBU in the case of our VP, Adolfo Hernandez, or whether they're leading the entire company in the case of Andy Jassy. We're all leaders. And the leadership principles are a framework that we can use for thinking about problems that we encounter. So they start with the principle of customer obsession, because Amazon's mission is to be Earth's most customer-centric company. And so customer obsession is the sort of primary one. But other than that, there's no sort of order or hierarchy to the leadership principles. They're all co-equal. And something you might notice is there is often tension between them. So if we pick one, so if we look at bias for action, for example, so bias for action says that speed matters in business, and you can get disproportionately better results by acting quickly. But on the other hand, that's sometimes in tension with dive deep. So dive deep says that you really need to get to the root of a technology problem and really understand things in great detail. And sometimes you might say, well, if I need to act quickly, do I really have the time to find out all that detail? And you've got to ask yourself then, in that case, those two things are in conflict. Is this the kind of decision where I absolutely have to get every last detail and understand every single point? Or should I just make a quick decision that's maybe 90% of a good decision, and then I can course correct as I go along. So we'll often find tension between leadership principles, and they're not supposed to be like some kind of magic alchemy type formula where you put the input data, you apply the leadership principles, you turn a handle, and you get a result. They're just a way to guide your thinking and understanding of a problem. And so when we have a look on this, one of the leadership principles that we'll see is learn and be curious. And that obviously is very applicable to things like certifications. If we dive into it a bit, each of the leadership principles has an expanded version. And here's the one for learn and be curious. So it says that leaders are never done learning and always seek to improve themselves. Leaders are curious about new possibilities and act to explore them. So you can see how that applies to the sharpening the saw kind of thing that I talked about. And there are some other indicators that might show that a person is living up to this leadership principle, is fulfilling this leadership principle. So, if you're curious about how things work, even if it's not necessary to really understand how it works to make use of it. If you look at setbacks and then try to learn lessons and make sure that the outcome next time is better, that's an aspect of learning and being curious. Generally accepting new and challenging situations and saying yes to things, even if there's a possibility of failure, that's an aspect of it. Or working systematically on an initiative to improve. And that's probably the indicator which is most closely aligned to AWS certifications, because it's certainly systematic and it has a defined outcome. And I mean, there are negative indicators too. So, I mean, if you see somebody who's always preferring to stay with the skills that they currently have, they want to stay in a familiar situation, then that's a kind of an indicator they're not really being curious, right? If somebody is very defensive about criticism, when it's constructive criticism, I mean, there's always the possibility that you have unconstructive criticism where somebody just says that was rubbish. That's not helpful to anybody. But if you have constructive criticism, but people are dismissive of it or disregard it, then that's sometimes a sign that that person is not willing to learn and be curious and examine their own behavior and how it could be improved. So as I say, from an Amazon internal perspective, certifications are one concrete way that we can show that we're learning and being curious. But what about an external perspective? So, if you don't work at AWS, why should you care about certifications? Well, I mean, there could be 100 motivations, right? So, learning in itself is a fun thing to do, I think. There's a satisfaction in developing a new skill. So there could be personal motivations. But I'll give a different motivation here, and that's encapsulated in this quote here. So 64% of leaders, according to a recent survey, said that there are cloud skills gaps across their teams. And so what that's really saying is that there's an unmet demand for skills. And by taking AWS certifications, you're showing that you're able to fulfill that demand. You're able to be the supply to that demand. And of course, as soon as we start talking about supply and demand, those are sort of economic terms. And we're thinking in terms of economics. And so I suggest, one very good reason to do AWS certifications is it shows employers unequivocally that you have the skills that they're looking for to fill this gap and that they're willing to pay for. And so there's a monetary motivation to doing AWS certifications, which is important, right? As well as the satisfaction of learning new skills, sharpening the saw, and so on. So what are the AWS certifications? Let me just talk about that briefly. So there are two kinds of certification, really. So there are role-based certifications, and then there are specialty certifications. So the role-based certifications are things like SysOps Administrator or Solutions Architect Associate or Solutions Architect Professional. And those are certifications that are looking for the knowledge and the skills that are required for a person to fulfill a particular role on the cloud. So to be a cloud solutions architect, to be a cloud administrator, these sort of substantiate that you're able to do that. And then there are the specialty certifications, which tend to focus more on a specific topic area. So it could be networking in the cloud, it could be data analytics, databases, security, things like that, all important topics, but they're very focused, right? So whereas there's quite a lot of breadth in Solutions Architect Associate, there's less breadth but more depth in the specialty exams. In terms of difficulty, I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I'd say that the specialty exams are of a comparable difficulty to professional. They're not necessarily more difficult, but they are more focused on a specific area. So to be successful in those, you have to sort of focus your attention in on the topic. And finally, to mention, not last but not least, the Cloud Practitioner Foundational. That's a really good starting point, and it's a really good one for people who are not necessarily working on AWS or working on the cloud themselves, but are maybe working with people who are working on the cloud, because then they, by doing that certification, by understanding that material, they have a knowledge of what the people they're working with are talking about. They understand the concepts and so on. So that can be a really good one for almost anybody in the organization, really. Okay, so how do we prepare for certifications? Well, I will say, from my own personal experience, and this is pretty much what everyone says, the best preparation for certification exams is practical experience, because when you go hands-on, you try stuff out in the console, you find out what works, what doesn't. It kind of just burns into your mind, the concepts and the details and everything. And there's no real substitute for that hands-on experience. It gives you a resource that you'll never forget. I guess it's a bit like riding a bicycle, right? It's that hands-on experience is somehow intrinsic to the learning of it. But having said that, there is written material as well. A really good starting point is here, aws.amazon.com/certification. That has loads of resources. So it has exam guides for each of the certifications. That tells you what does this certification cover, and what percentage of the exam is on this topic or that topic. Then there's training and exam preparation courses that you can take a look at in combination with hands-on stuff. There are official practice questions, and those are really useful for working out, am I ready to book the actual certification? So I can do a practice question set, and let's say I get 7 out of 10 right. That's probably an indicator that I'm almost there, and that might be a good time to schedule the certification for a couple of weeks out and just work on a few final areas. There are other AWS resources like white papers, FAQs. So every AWS service has an FAQ page that tends to go into some of the useful detail that is likely to be on exam certification. So that's really well worth looking at. And then there are practice exams that you can take, and of course you can schedule the actual certification. I did all of mine with Pearson VUE on using their online thing, which it had a few bugs in the early days, I have to say. But it's improved, and I find that the convenience of being able to do the certifications from home is really good. But I believe you can do them in test centers as well. I just never did that personally. So yeah, other resources. So there aren't just AWS resources. I'm sure if you go on Google and you type AWS certifications, you'll get pages and pages of results. I've just picked a few out here. The top one, this is the one that I tended to use. So I quite like this guy, Stéphane Marek. He's a French guy, and I just liked his style. He had a good way of explaining things. So I used his courses quite extensively on Udemy. Just something to say about Udemy, that if you go onto Udemy and a course is at full price, don't buy it, because they're forever having sales. So, a full price course might be like $100 or something like that. But they normally have sales where they will take like 85% off. So you can normally get a course for like no more than $15 US. And I would not recommend paying any more than that, definitely. There are other resources that people speak well of. So WizLabs, Adrian Cantrell in particular gets very good reviews, A Cloud Guru, and there may be, a million others. I'll also just mention here the AWS training and certification blog. That's pretty good. So sometimes that has quite focused items. So they a while back they had a post that was 10 study resources for SAP on AWS specialty exam, and that was really useful because actually the SAP on AWS, that's the material there is a little bit quirky, so you have to understand quite a bit about SAP, and if you don't happen to run SAP, then it's not necessarily easy to figure out how you find that. So that was a really good resource there. Okay. So having talked about certifications, let me tell you a little bit about my personal certification journey. So I drew it as a graph because I'm a kind of data sort of guy, I guess. And I think it's sort of interesting, right? You can see a few things from this picture. So first thing to notice, I was hired by AWS on the 29th of July, 2020. Yeah, so actually, this is a complete coincidence, but today is my 3-year, as we would say, anniversary. So I've been at AWS exactly 3 years as of today. So that's kind of cool. But one thing you can see is that when I was hired, I had 0 AWS certifications. And so it's interesting, I guess, for people to know that certifications are not a hiring prerequisite at AWS for any role, including solutions architecture. So I had very little AWS experience in general, actually, when I joined. Fortunately, I had some other experience, which I guess counted for something. And then, so once I joined, you can see, for the first couple of years, I was learning, doing certifications at a certain rate, fulfilling the leadership principle. And the first one I did was Solutions Architect Associate, and then Solutions Architect Professional. And yeah, you can see a fairly straight line here. And then around sort of October 2022, you can see things sort of suddenly accelerate. So what happened here? I guess there were a few things that happened, right? Number one, I realized I wasn't really all that far away from having all of the certifications, and someone else in my team had joked with me about the Golden Jacket back in the summer of 2022. So I was like, is that a real thing? That can't possibly be real. But I found out it was real. So there was a kind of a bit of motivation from that. Secondly, in around this time, I made the decision to start an IC to M transition. So in other words, to switch from being an individual contributor to being a manager. I'd just say at AWS and at Amazon in general, there is no sort of automatic like managers are senior to individual contributors. You can grow in your career and you can succeed either as an individual contributor or as a manager, and you can switch backwards and forwards, and people do that. So it's not that managers are automatically more senior, but I just thought I would have a bit of a change and do that transition. And that sort of changed my motivation about doing certifications as well. So I went from wanting to stimulate my own learning, really, to being able to want to advise people about their own certification journeys, but to do that from a position of first-hand knowledge. So, like this certification is difficult, this overlaps with that kind of advice. The last thing that happened in October 2022, it turned out that my timing was quite bad to do an IC to manager transition, because this was almost exactly the time that we stopped hiring as well. So that has made it more difficult to be a manager. So I have like lots of roles that I would have liked to fill that I can't just yet. But what it also meant was that I went from doing, as I said, hiring and developing the best is another one of our leadership principles. And that's actually quite a time-consuming thing for most AWS folks, or it was when we were hiring. So I used to spend, between 4, 6, some weeks, like 8 hours interviewing every week. And when we stopped hiring, I suddenly got all that time back. And I knew that, well, unless you keep control of your time, it just gets absorbed by other things, by other activities. But I wanted to purposefully do something with that time that had suddenly been handed back to me. Literally a whole load of stuff got cancelled out of my calendar. And I thought, well, what I'll do, I'll reblock that time and just use it to study and finish off these certifications. And so that's what I did. And that kind of enabled me to finish these last few certifications pretty quickly. A little bit more detail about the exact order I did them in. I'm not going to read all of these out, but there are some useful things to note here. So I mentioned already that the solutions architect and so the associate and professional solutions architect certifications, those are an explicit goal in your first 12 months as a solutions architect at AWS. So, that's one good reason to do them. But the other good reason to do them is they're very good foundational material for all of the rest. So, so if you've mastered the material for the essay exams, then you are probably at least 50% of the way on all of the other exams as well. So they're a very good starting point. Sometimes people ask, what are the hardest certifications? And I would say, for me anyway, the two hardest were machine learning speciality and advanced networking speciality. The first one is because machine learning, there's less overlap between that certification and the solutions architect and all of the other ones. So there's more that's kind of just specific stuff about machine learning approaches and algorithms and so on. And advanced networking is, I found difficult because one of the services it covers in quite a lot of depth is Direct Connect. So Direct Connect is the AWS service that lets you have layer 1 physical connectivity from AWS to your own data center. And of course, if you don't happen to have a data center, that's a little bit more difficult to play around with in a hands-on way. So it's a little bit more difficult, to burn those things into your brain. So I found that one quite hard. Yeah, what else? So there are actually 13 certifications on here. There are 12 external ones and one internal one, which is this tier 2 speaker. That's an associate level internal only certification for AWS folk who want to speak at public events. And then there's kind of not shown on here, but there's a sort of hidden 14th one as well, because once you get all 13 certifications, then you think, right, okay, great, I earned my golden jacket. Where is it? The kind of funny thing about it is there's no nobody tells you like go click here and order your golden jacket, or it doesn't arrive automatically or anything like that. So you have to kind of figure out for yourself, well, how do I actually get this golden jacket? So that's a kind of the hidden 14th certification. Yeah, so what next? As we said, leaders are never done learning, right? That's part of the leadership principle, learn and be curious. So what am I doing now, having run out of certifications to do? A couple of things. So quite often Amazon has a way of innovating on behalf of customers, right? And that's something that we're proud of. It's something that has been a core part of the DNA of the company. So we have the leadership principle of invent and simplify, and we have dive deep. All of these things are aspects of continuing to innovate and continuing to push the boundaries of what's possible with technology. And sometimes our customers ask us, well, how do you maintain that culture? Amazon is not a startup anymore. It's a big, in some ways quite old company. So how do you maintain that culture that is a continuous innovation culture? And we have specific ways that we do that. So it's partly to do with the way that we organize our teams. We have specific mechanisms. It's the type of people that we hire. It's a number of aspects. And we're not saying that that's the only way that you can innovate. It's just a way that we found that works for us. And quite often customers ask us about it, and so we have a specific program that is how we tell that story. That's the Culture of Innovation program. So I'm training to be an approved speaker for that at the moment. And then the other thing is that the cloud evolves pretty quickly. I think anyone who's used the cloud for any amount of time knows that. And so hence certifications only last 3 years. So the first one that I will need to recertify is Solutions Architect Professional. SA Pro sort of recertifies SA Associate for you. So that one is kind of subsumed into this one. And so coming up soon, I'll need to get the books back out and restudy for my SA Pro certificate in April 2024. So that's, I guess, not that far away, right? But yeah. So leaders are never done learning. So you can always find another thing to learn about. And I guess if you run out of things to learn about, then I don't know, you should write a book or something like that and learn something that way. But yeah, that was my journey. So thank you very much for listening. I will stop there. Really happy to take questions. The video back on. I see a couple of things in the chat. But yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, John. I think I was the one who wrote in the chat there. My best takeaway from what you were explaining is leaders are never done learning and always seek to improve themselves. Personally, as someone whose dream is to always eventually retire in leadership, I resonate with that deeply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
My first question is, on your certification path there, I see data analytics was the last one you did, right?
Yeah.
It's a set which I'm also trying to get into, and would love to hear some insights from you on how that exam can be tackled, especially with now every LinkedIn post you see for jobs, it's talking about data science. How does that set tie into this world of artificial intelligence and ML? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, yeah, you're right. Like data is fundamental to ML. And so whenever you come across there is a significant amount of overlap between the machine learning and the data analytics certifications, I will say. So you get, I mean, those would probably be good ones. If you were going to do both, you should probably do them, close together. Yeah, so again, part of it is, I think, if you have a practical problem in your work life that you can approach with data analytics tools, then that's a really good starting point, because then you're doing something for real, and that really helps to, I don't know, stimulate your curiosity about what the best tool is going to be. But then otherwise you can start with the courses that I mentioned. So, have a look on Udemy or have a look on WizLabs or something like that. Lots of the courses tend to have lab material. So they'll have like a data set and some kind of exercises that you go through. And those are quite fun. And it's sort of then fun to say, okay, I've done this or this and that with the data set, but then what else can I do? Or there are freely available data sets that you can have a look at. So for example, for some completely other reason, I just downloaded a 1.5 gig file that gives a list of companies that own properties in the UK. And actually that would be a really interesting starting point to say, well, what could I do with that in a data analytics tool? So I could ingest that into something and I could, find out, well, which company owns the most property in the UK? That would actually be kind of an interesting question. So I think, yeah, having that sort of, having something that is a starting point or something that you want to try to do is often a good idea, whether it's for machine learning or data analytics or any other one of these things. And then go and give it a try and, use the search engine, have a look on the AWS services pages and figure out what the best fit is for those problems that you want to try and solve. Does that help? I'm not sure.
Yes, it does. It left me 3,000 rands poorer overnight. I forgot to switch off a glue job.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Ouch. Yeah.
True.
So
there is,
yeah.
We have a hand from Rendani. Yes, you can unmute and.
Cool, thanks, Felix. Hi, John, Rendani here.
Hey, how you doing, Rendani? Nice to see you.
I'm good. Can't put on the video, still disable the video, so yeah. So like for me, one thing that I'm trying to do is like around optimizing time, and like we can see that like as you're saying that where you get most of the time to do most of the certification is during the hiring freeze,
Yeah.
But like now throughout of like these certifications that you've already done, like if I have to optimize time, and then what can you advise and then to say like, and then because like I can tell from what I've done, the database and the data analytics, there's some kind of like a relationship, but not that much. But like when you've covered everything, you might have some sweet spot, and then we say like, this is where you can optimize time, this is where you can save time.
Yeah, okay. So I've got a couple of little hacks like that. So I would say that security is one speciality that has a lot of overlap, I found, with SA Pro. And especially if you've been at AWS and at AWS, we say security is job zero. So you get very attuned to the idea of doing things in a secure way. So whether that's least privileged roles or using private link instead of going across the internet, or various other things, that it just becomes very natural that you can determine what the most secure way to do something is without really thinking too hard about it. It becomes like almost second nature. So I would say the speciality certification, I would say that's probably the easiest speciality certification. So that's one quick hack. And then what else? So this maybe surprisingly, SAP on AWS is a bit like that as well. So there's a little bit about, there's a little bit of SAP specific terminology, but a lot of it is about architecting a highly available application that is mission critical for a business across AWS infrastructure. So availability zones, multiple regions, having having the ability to do disaster recovery with a low RPO, that kind of thing. And again, it's not that dissimilar from architecting any HA application really on AWS. So I'd say again, that's not that difficult. And then you've got the kind of the overlaps between so as we talked about, so machine learning and data analytics have a fair amount of overlap. So they would make sense to do close together. What else? Obviously things like developer associate and DevOps engineer, the one naturally leads to the other. So that could be another sort of short circuit. So yeah, if you were trying to design this to do them in the most optimized order, those are some of the tricks that I would use, I think. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No worries.
Thank you, Rendani. I think your question just reminded me of a poll I saw on LinkedIn. I think it was done by Joel. He's part of our community here. He was asking that I've completed my associate certifications. What's next on the board? So for me, my reply, which I actually gave there was, I don't think I can architect stuff which I don't understand. So I was thinking I would go with security, networking, then probably DevOps. Then I can circle back to the solution architect professional. Maybe you can give us your view on that, John, as well.
Yeah, I think you've got to take into account what your interests are as well. So if there's something that you have a natural curiosity about, like you want to know more about security, or you want to know more about networking, then that's an inbuilt advantage, right? So you should always go with your sort of your gut instinct, your intuition about I'd like to learn more about this, because that will make you more, your mind will be more open, you'll find it more enjoyable to learn, and that means you'll devote more time to it, etc. So so that's always a factor, and that, that's probably the most important factor, really, because if you're just forcing yourself to do it, then it's hard work. I think I find it harder to learn stuff when I'm just sort of forcing it. Yeah, and as I say, then all the certifications are sort of additive. So in some ways it doesn't really matter which order you do it in, because as you go through the kind of program, then the more certifications you've done, the easier you'll find the rest of the certifications. And it's not because they are getting easier, it's just because you have more knowledge. And like when you're learning a new language, and you sort of learn one or two words, and it's hard to learn each word, but then you get to a certain point where your rate of learning naturally increases, because you're able to make more connections, and you're able to sort of think, oh yeah, that word sounds a bit like another word that I do know. And so you just start making those connections, and that's definitely what happens with the AWS certification material. You just start to see those connections, and probably you also get quite good at doing exams as well. So exam technique is a big factor. I mean, the AWS certifications are either multiple choice or multiple answer, and when you look at the multiple choice ones, there's a question that says, an architect is trying to do blah blah blah, what should they do? And then you look at the answers, and there are, usually what I found is there are two stupid ones where it's like, well, nobody would ever do it that way or that way. And then there are two that are both quite plausible, and then you have to kind of read carefully, because then the question, if you go back and read the question again, it will say, what is the most cost-effective way to do blah blah blah? And then you look at the two remaining plausible ones, and one of them, they'll both work, right? The two remaining ones probably, but one of them will be you're running, I don't know, on-demand EC2 instances 24/7 or something, and the other one is you use a Lambda function, and then immediately then you can go, oh yeah, okay, the Lambda function is always going to be more cost-effective. So yeah, for all kinds of reasons, they get easier. I mean, that's a factor in this acceleration that I didn't mention as well, but I mean, they definitely get easier as you go through, both because you know more and because you had more practice at doing exams. They're both significant factors. But I mean, follow your kind of passion and your own curiosity, I guess, is my principal advice.
Awesome, thank you. I think it also ties back to what you initially said, like the specialty exams, people should not be scared of them. They are not necessarily hard. It's just they are more specialized. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I'd say they are no more difficult than the professional exams, and in some cases they're easier. So I'd say security is a bit easier, but yeah, they're definitely no more difficult.
I don't want to be selfish and keep going through my list of questions which I prepared for you. Is there anyone in the audience who has a question? Oh yeah, someone just posted in the channel. Thank you for the lovely presentation, John. If I may ask, with the sets, what projects have you worked on, and where the sets a good way to apply yourself in your work at AWS? As you mentioned that at AWS, you don't necessarily get hired based on sets. Another one, what is the area that you most like doing?
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, so to answer the first question, I mean, so as you see on this, like machine learning was the first specialty that I did. And that was because I had a real curiosity about that. And actually, I kind of had a a sort of suspicion that, you know, this machine learning stuff, this is not all it's cracked up to be. And that, you know, that was way back before the current hype really started, right? So that was just in the 2 years ago time of just an average amount of hype about AI. And I was like, you know, is it really that good? I need to learn more about this. So that was just a kind of, you know, pure curiosity thing, really. And I'll give you an example of something that I did around the time I was learning the machine learning stuff, right? So one of the things I like to do personally is cycle. So I cycle around near my house, and I find there's quite a lot of trash and rubbish that people have thrown out of car windows or whatever, which is, you know, horrible to see. And some of it is from like fast food restaurants. So like you'll see a McDonald's bag, you know, Coke kind of cup and that kind of thing. And I started to sort of think like, you know, this is really annoying. What would be cool would be if like you could capture an image of this rubbish, detect that it was from McDonald's, and then, you know, capture the EXIF data out of the photo, and so you know where it is, and then you could just email the local McDonald's to say, hey, did you know there's some of your trash lying in the road at this location? Why don't you send somebody to pick it up? Actually, that's an idea that I'd had, you know, years ago when I used to cycle to my previous job, and when I was thinking about doing it from scratch, it just seemed like an impossibly large problem to solve. But then as I got into learning about the AWS services, so like Recognition is a computer vision service that just works through an API. So you just pass it a photo, like a JPEG, and it will send you back a JSON document that says, like, I found a dog in this image and it's at this bounding box. I found, you know, I don't know, a person at this bounding box, that kind of thing. I found 6 cars, whatever. It does that kind of thing for you. Like, so it's a pre-trained model. But you can also do transfer learning with it. So you can also train it to recognize more specialized things with a feature called custom labels. And so so I took the existing recognition model and trained it to recognize McDonald's rubbish. And like in my morning cycling thing, I would like take photos of rubbish, some of it branded, some of it unbranded. Yeah, so I trained this model to recognize McDonald's branded rubbish, and it would say, yeah, is McDonald's, I think I did Burger King as well, but yeah, I mean, it's just based on what I could find lying in the street. And yeah, and it's, you know, to be honest, it was amazingly accurate. So it kind of like resolved my uncertainties about machine learning, because it was like, yeah, actually this is almost like magic. It can recognize McDonald's rubbish brilliantly well, and extracting the EXIF data was just trivial stuff. I never got around to the bit about emailing the local restaurant, so I haven't solved the trash problem, but you know, I certainly learned a few things doing that. So yeah, I mean, that's just a good example of something that I did when sharpening the saw. I mean, most of what I do is trying to help customers to solve problems. So that involves less building actual solutions. You know, you might build something, might sort of more like demonstrate services to them. My customers are enterprise customers. I mean, they're telcos, so they tend to have a reasonable level of maturity anyway. So quite often what we're doing there is really advising more about enterprise transformation, really. So it's not particularly a technology subject, but again, it's a difficult thing, and it's more kind of drawing on lessons learned and that kind of thing. So what's the area I most like doing? Yeah, I don't know. I like the variety, actually. So I think you saw in the slide that I put up about solutions architects, a day in the life of a solutions architect. It's pretty varied, and I think, you know, Sally would say the same thing, that actually you can be doing completely different things from one day to the next, and I find that, you know, refreshing, that you don't get stuck in a rut of just doing one same thing. You get a lot of variety. So that's kind of my favorite thing, I guess. Hope that answered the question.
Awesome, thank you. We have a hand from Tino Tenda. You can unmute and ask.
Oh, okay, thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much, John, for the wonderful presentation. I'm inspired. I have 2 questions. The first one is quite funny. So I see the cloud practitioner is one of the last ones the last certifications you did. I was just curious, did you study for that one?
I actually didn't. I just took a risk on it because I figured I should be able to just pass this straight off the bat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I didn't study that one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could have imagined. Yeah. Okay. So the second question I had, right? So it's quite personal. I'm on my 6th certification.
Cool.
And I feel like I'm quite early in my career. And I was having a conversation with someone last week, and they were like, well, having all the certifications since I'm halfway, I mean, would look bad on your CV since your experience is so, you know, in the cloud. It's not a lot. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I you know, I don't agree. I think maybe the argument is, yeah. So let's choose something. So I've got a specialty certification in SAP on AWS, but you know, in reality, I know almost nothing about SAP on AWS, right? So having a certification, it doesn't really establish that you are an expert, but it does establish that you are willing to learn, right? And I think that's an important indicator about career success anyway. And so, yeah, would you choose somebody that's got all 12 certifications versus somebody that's got none? I think it tells you something about the person, right? And about, you know, willingness to persevere with things, dedication. So it's more of a behavioral indicator, you know, like when we're talking about the learn and be curious leadership principle, and it's not necessarily, you know, it doesn't necessarily say, okay, you've got SAP on AWS, that means I can just give you, you know, my AWS account, you go and set up SAP on AWS for me. Not necessarily, but it would be probably a good starting point, right? So, yeah, I don't know, it's a bit of a waffly answer, but I'd say go for it, you know.
Thank you.
I actually agree with you. A practical example is a few weeks after I wrote my advanced networking, the driver for me to write advanced networking was I was working in a cloud migration project, and we were setting up Direct Connect, and it showed me flames and forced me to learn about networking. In the end, I went and wrote advanced networking. Then what happened is a few weeks, I got an interview for the job, which I eventually got. And one of the questions which was asked was, how do you make sure your communication doesn't traverse the internet? And I knew from my set that it's VPC endpoints, this one, even without fully understanding how they are configured. And that job involved a lot of VPC endpoints, and it helped me get that job from actually doing the set. So don't let people delay your prosperity, Tino.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice.
Yeah. There is Brenda asking, is security in the cloud a best path to go after? Coupled with this question, so that you can answer it at once, I actually wanted to ask, I've been seeing other industry sets like those CCNP ones for security. How do we tie them together with our AWS and things like multi-cloud? You know, you get to companies who are using Azure AD for auth, then the rest is on AWS. How do we handle that from a certification perspective?
Yeah, that's a great couple of questions. So, I mean, to cover the security thing first, yeah, you know, security is job zero. So it's so fundamental to using the cloud successfully, to running a business successfully. I would say, yes, that's a great one to go for, you know, without a doubt. And then, yeah, coming back to the alternate certifications thing, that's a really interesting one. I mean, so again, I'd say, yeah, probably combine it with your curiosity. So I know that, you know, some of the container certifications, like the Kubernetes ones, are very popular at the moment, and obviously that's an extremely in demand piece of subject matter. The machine learning stuff, yeah, again, there is almost unlimited demand for that stuff. So I mean, I don't know if I would ever see myself doing all the other cloud ones as well, because I guess if you're just learning, okay, you know, let's say there's a concept like, I don't know, what's a good concept? Like EC2, for example, you know, if you're just learning all the kind of EC2 terminology, and then, okay, same concepts, but Azure calls it something different and Google calls it something different. I think that doesn't feel very satisfying. So I don't think I would go down the path of getting all the certifications from each like major cloud provider personally. But I guess if you did do that, then you would probably be able to articulate the kind of different strengths of different cloud providers very well. So that might be an interesting skill to have. But yeah, I think it's more in the domain of other specialities. So whether it's containers or whether it's AI or networking. So like the Cisco and Juniper certifications are, again, I'd say those are gold standard certifications really, and very useful in a cloud environment, just as they are in an on-prem environment, and particularly in a hybrid environment, right? I mean, that's probably something that you would comment on, Phyllis. So yeah, great question. And yeah, they're all good, right?
Okay, awesome. I don't know if anyone has another question. They haven't raised hands. I don't see any hands. If you have, you can just unmute and ask. Okay.
Hi, name is Monde. I just want to ask this question. Sorry for the background noise. I just want to ask this question, right? I've been interested in cloud, right, in AWS cloud, but I have an opportunity to write for free. I saw it's free to write also the other cloud practitioner for Oracle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, is it really advisable to have 2 certificates, even if it's from? Is it advisable to just have more than 1?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's I think having any certification is better than not having that certification, right? Because it proves that you made the effort to learn something, you made the effort to take the exam, you achieved the pass mark. So yeah, I would say if you have the opportunity to do it, then do it. And certainly Oracle is an interesting one, right? Because I guess they are a challenger cloud provider, I would say, but they are definitely growing, and there are some organizations. I mean, I work with a couple. One of my customers is like the largest Oracle user in Europe, and so there are definitely there are some organizations where having Oracle certifications would be absolutely excellent, particularly in combination with AWS certifications, for example. That would very much be the case for the customer that I'm thinking of. So yeah, I would say go for it. I mean, I don't think there's ever a good reason not to do a certification, if you see what I mean. I mean, there can be other priorities, like you might not have time, you might have something else that you want to do instead, like write a white paper or write a piece of code or write a blog post or whatever. So priorities, but that doesn't mean that it would be bad to do a certification, right? It just means that you've got something else that you want to do before you do that certification, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, because I've seen there's some companies in South Africa. In fact, I've seen the offices back there in South Africa for some years now. But thank you so much. It just, thank you so much. It just comes along with what Phyllis was just saying earlier on regarding multi-cloud companies. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, John Sello, I think the Oracle one always comes up. You and I are always helping our customers with Oracle, right? Because
it's getting really hot.
Are you getting hot there?
Yeah,
I think this was the idea, to see how long you can stay inside your jacket.
It's kind of like wearing baking foil, right?
I can imagine. So I think maybe to just double click on the Oracle question, is almost like every second customer will have some form of Oracle on-prem or wherever. So having the Oracle skill is actually not a bad idea, because most organizations will have an Oracle database one way or another, or legacy, or maybe they just have the skill and they just don't feel like switching databases yet, because they've invested so much time and skill, and it takes a long time to actually maybe modernize your databases. So they just keep running Oracle for years.
Yeah, 100%. And there's overlap between these things, right? Isn't there? Because I mean, I can think of like 4 or 5 ways that you can run Oracle on AWS, without even trying, right? So there's definite overlap between someone who has Oracle skills, someone who has AWS skills. The person who has both, is in a kind of a smaller part of the space, more in demand. So yeah, it's definitely well worthwhile. I've never worked with a single customer who didn't have Oracle in their estate somewhere. So
yeah.
Awesome, thank you. You put me on mute there. I'm clueless on Oracle. Is there one more before we have 3 minutes left? One more question from the audience. Guys, so I'm soon gonna get my golden jacket and I'll be denying invites to talks like this and be just sending this recording for John. So make sure you ask him all the questions, because I know a number of people in our group here who are already on the 7th, 8th set. We are actually gonna have a mini group where we decline invites and send this recording because it's so insightful and educational. Thank you so much, John.
If you're on 7 or 8, you just got to go for it, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah. So John, maybe while we're on that note, are you becoming more famous now? Are you getting a lot of attention now because are you signing autographs even?
So you know what, we had a mini team get together and I wore my jacket to that, and again I got very hot doing that, but that was a kind of a funny moment because it's like notoriety, and there is a Slack channel as well actually of like people that have got golden jackets and post photos themselves. So there's I mean, awesome. But it's just like, that's just for a bit of fun, right? We're not being big-headed or arrogant about it. It's just like, it's a fun thing. It's a kind of a silly thing. So I see there's a question in the chat. Like if you could go back in time and change some aspects in your certification journey, what would it be? Yeah, it's a good question. I think if I really had the power to go back in time, I might do something else with that power. But if it was limited to only changing things about my AWS certification journey, I would probably make some of those optimizations we talked about. So machine learning and data analytics, just do those at the, sort of close to each other. That's probably the main one. So tweaks really. I mean, and I think that, I'm saying it's only tweaks that I would make because there isn't really a right or wrong way to do it. It's all additive no matter what order you do it in. So it's always going to get easier no matter what order you do it in. And you're always learning something new as you go through the path. So I'd make a tweak or two, but I mean, I enjoyed it, so I wouldn't change too much.
Yeah, power of going back in time. I'm actually envying that from you as well.
Yeah, I'd buy Amazon stock in the year like 1998, and that would be a good move, right? But,
very good one. Thank you so much, John. We are almost out of time. We appreciate you making the time to come and share your journey with us.
Yeah,
we will reach out again back to you with some testimonies from the group when we get our jackets, and you give us the tip for where to find that 14th set.
Okay.
Made a note down for it.
Yeah,
so
cool.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Tseka, for getting John to come and grace us. And everyone else for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. We meet again next week. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Cheers, folks. Have a good evening. Bye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
evening, everyone. Ciao.
Bye.